Senate GOP lawmakers has unveiled a roughly $570 billion counterproposal. Joining us right now to talk about the competing plans and how President Biden plans to pay for his plan is Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg. And Mr. Secretary, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me on. Nice to be with you.
It's good to see you. We can talk about the Republicans' plans, but I think everything kind of hinges on what Democratic Senator Joe Manchin is planning and doing right now. People have been watching him very closely, especially in recent days, as it looks like he is really starting to tap the brakes on things. You all can't use the budget reconciliation without his vote because it's such a close Senate at this point. And I just wonder, have you or anybody else in the administration reached out to Joe Manchin to see what his thoughts are and how quickly you might be able to sway him?
Yeah, sure. We're in touch with him. He prefers a bipartisan approach, and so do I, and so does the president. And that's why we're not only in dialogue with our fellow Democrats across the spectrum, but of course we're in dialogue with Republicans. We're glad they came to the table with their version. That's a starting point. But we also need to be moving pretty quickly here because I think the American people expect results quickly. You know, we've allowed our infrastructure to fall to 13th place in the world. And one area that there's strong bipartisan agreement, definitely out in the country among the American people, is that we've got to act and we've got to invest in a big, big way. That's what our plan does, and that's what we're discussing every day with people from both houses and both parties.
I think you're right that there is definitely some bipartisanship when it comes to infrastructure, but that depends on your definition of infrastructure. And the big plans and moving forward quickly probably don't correlate with bipartisanship at all. Joe Manchin wants to slow down and talk to Republicans and embrace, at this point, it looks like something between $600 billion and $1 trillion in infrastructure. Is that something that you're willing to give him time to sort out with the other side?
Yeah, we're eager to have these conversations, but we got to make sure that it's big. We got to make sure that these investments are over the baseline of what would have happened anyway. And these are exactly the conversations that are going on right now. I think it was a mayor who once said that there's no such thing as a Democratic or a Republican hole in the road. So I've got to believe that if there's any area of bipartisan cooperation left, this is it. We know that our roads and bridges need work. We know that our ports and our airports are not what they could be. We know that Americans have been asked to settle for less on rail, on transit. And by the way, this isn't just an issue for quality of life for Americans. This is an issue for our business competitiveness, too. You look at our allies, you look at our strategic competitors, definitely China. They are not shy to make big infrastructure investments. And a lot's going to depend on what we here in the early 2020s choose to do.
But, Secretary, if you look at infrastructure, again, the bipartisan angle is one that's a much narrower definition of infrastructure and probably one that fits into your purview as a transportation secretary a little bit better, too. Would you be okay with a stripped down version like Senator Manchin has said that he wants that does not include some of the at-home services and some of the in-the-community services that really just looks at more traditional examples of transportation, things like bridges, roads, even broadband? Would you be okay with taking $1 trillion or less of a package and focusing just on that?
Well, we believe these things go together. That's why the president planned them in a package that goes together. But there's a really complex process of give and take and legislative mechanics, and we're going through that process right now. What I will say is I think the debate over whether to call something infrastructure is a little beside the point. You know, the truth is a strong majority of Americans believe in making sure that something like elder care is more affordable. I think that's part of our economic infrastructure because a lot of people aren't in the workforce because they can't afford to take care of loved ones. But if you don't think that's infrastructure and we still agree that it's good policy, then my message to those Republican legislators is, hey, vote for it anyway, call it whatever you like, and we can both celebrate doing something good for the American people. But this is the process we're going through right now, and I do think we're going to get to something that's going to be good for the American people and that's going to help move us forward.
Mr. Secretary, I agree completely with something you said earlier, and I was really happy to hear you say that that infrastructure improvements will benefit our corporations and their ability to compete globally, which is what we really want them to do. Then I think about probably your support for raising corporate taxes back to 28%, and you add in state taxes, and it goes up quite a bit higher than that. You put in the GILTI part of things, the GLTI part of things, you can get up to where we're the highest taxed nation in the world in terms of corporations And I'm just wondering, how do you square those two? That you understand we need to be competitive, our corporations,
Yeah.
but you don't think that it's many people on the both on the other side and nonpartisan, even some organizations, definitely think we're going to hurt our competitiveness if we raise corporate taxes to those levels.
Yeah, well, I square them by looking at the data and the evidence from the United States. Look, American corporations and business sector was competitive in the 60s, competitive in the 90s, competitive in the 2000s, all periods where we had a 35% or much higher rate. So to tell me that something has gone wrong in the American business community, that this business sector that was incredibly competitive at 35 plus has suddenly lost its capability to be competitive at 28, it just doesn't seem to square with the evidence.
Well, there was
a time. Remember, there was a time when 28 was what conservatives were hoping.
But
to
the rest of the world is
right too.
Secretary, the rest of the world has been going down. You know, that's why they call it a race to the bottom. The rest of the world has been cutting, and competitive is one thing. American businesses will always be competitive. I'm talking about less competitive than they are right now, and we did see some benefits from the recent cuts. So
so the race to the bottom is a real issue, and that's one of the reasons why the president's plan adjusts the issues that are incentivizing parking dollars overseas. But again, there's every evidence that American business can handle this, and this has been modeled, right? You look at Moody's analysis, for example, shows that America creates more jobs if we do this plan, including the tax plan, than if we don't do this plan. Because the biggest thing holding America back right now, at least in terms of our long-term outlook for competitiveness, is the fact that we've tolerated a deteriorating infrastructure. Look, you can't get something for nothing. But when you add this all up, I think it's going to be a win, not just for the American people, but for businesses too. Even if some of those corporations that have paid zero taxes on billions of dollars of profits in the last few years have to pony up a little bit to make sure it happens.
Hey, Mr. Secretary, question about the framing of this. Right now, the higher taxes are being framed as effectively pay-fors for the infrastructure package and some of the other ambitions by the administration. The question I'd ask you is, if, for example, the price of the infrastructure package ultimately came down by half or even less than that, do you believe that the tax raises should come down as well, or are the tax raises something very different, which is just to say that we want to bring in more revenue more broadly, deal with debt, deal with other things, or do you think of them as directly tied?
Well, there's a reason that the amount we're proposing to invest and the amount we're proposing to raise in terms of revenue are connected. They align because the president believes that the vision he's putting forward ought to be paid for. And then when you run it out past the 15-year window where we collect those revenues, for these purposes, it's actually serving to reduce the deficit starting in year 16. Now, I know that's the template, right? That's the plan we put forward. Congress will have all kinds of ideas about the pay-fors, the revenues, and the spending, and that's part of what has to be discussed and negotiated now. But I just want to stress that the plan the president put forward, the vision that we're arriving at this negotiation with, is one that's fiscally responsible in that we've actually identified how to pay for everything we're proposing to do.
Mr. Secretary, can we ask you about another issue that we spend a lot of time focusing on, and that's the crashes that we've seen from some of these autopilot vehicles, these vehicles that let you drive yourselves. Right now, NHTSA, which is under the control of the Transportation Department, is looking into, I think, 24 different cases of crashes like these. And there's been a lot of public commentary after a crash over the last week in Texas. In the meantime, the head of the NTSB has said that he thinks that there needs to be more control asserted on what companies can and can't say about what autopilot is. I just wonder what your thoughts are on that matter.
Yeah, so the Texas crash is under investigation, and NHTSA is involved in that, so I can't speak to that directly yet. But let me mention two things. First of all, policy needs to evolve to keep up with the technology around automated vehicles. You know, automated vehicles present a tremendous opportunity, including, by the way, theoretically, a huge safety opportunity, because human drivers don't have the best track record when we're seeing, well over 30,000 fatal crashes a year. But that's talking about the future. In terms of the technology that you can get right now, when you buy a car with these advanced features, it's very important to point out that anything available on the market today is designed to assist a driver, not to replace a driver. It counts on you being in your seat, paying attention. And that remains the main issue of safety today, is having attentive drivers, not distracted, not impaired. And we're going to continue driving that with NHTSA, even as we're looking ahead to what's going on with technology. And frankly, we need to work with Congress, because the authorities that we have are designed around the vehicles we've known up until now. We've got to be ready for the vehicles of the future.
Secretary Buttigieg, it's great to see you today. Thanks for your time.
Working with you.